Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time to an England bathed in candlelight and fear, when a single whisper could create a dynasty or end a life. Picture London at night, white fog crawling over the River Thames like the breath of a ghost, the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral echoing through the mist, and inside a nearby palace, a queen lies awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Not because of war, not because of her crown, but because of a memory no one is ever allowed to know. History remembers her as Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. Yet, the most beautiful legends often hide the darkest truths. Behind the radiant mask of power was a woman who once loved, once lost, and perhaps once concealed, a child the world would never see. For centuries, that secret slept beneath stone and silence, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. If you think the royal court was all silk and glory, think again. In Elizabeth's court, love was treason, and secrets were the most expensive currency of all. Trust me, you wouldn't last a single night inside those walls. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd really love to know, where are you listening from tonight? What city? What country, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's slip quietly into tonight's story together. In the cold, damp darkness of Westminster Abbey, where the candles flicker and die one by one, two tombs lie side by side. On one side rests Mary Tudor, the so-called Bloody Mary, who burned hundreds of souls in the name of faith. Beside her, beneath a heavy slab carved with the words Elizabeth Regina, lies her successor, the Virgin Queen, the shining symbol of an empire. Two women once divided by faith and power now lie silent beneath the same vaulted roof as the wind sighs through ancient stone columns. The keeper of the tombs says that on nights when the wind drifts in from the River Thames, you can hear faint whispers like silk brushing against stone. Some say it's only the wind. Others swear it's Elizabeth herself, still trying to guard a secret that was never meant to be revealed. More than 400 years have passed. Records have vanished, letters were burned, and rumors faded with time. But then, in a dusty archive in Madrid, Spanish historians stumbled upon a name: Arthur Dudley. The man appeared suddenly in the year 1587, claiming to be the son of Queen Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley, her most famous and secret lover. At first, people laughed, dismissing him as a madman or a spy. But when Arthur began describing life inside the royal palace, the Queen's private habits, the rooms only the closest attendants could know, the laughter stopped. The storyteller leans closer, voice lowering. He knew the Queen's fondness for perfumes made of lavender petals. He knew she kept a small dagger under her pillow as she slept. He even knew she bore a faint scar on her shoulder, a remnant of an illness from her youth. None of these details appear in any record. Why did he know them? And if he truly was Elizabeth's child, then why did he vanish from history? Some notes in the archives mention that in the winter of 1561, the Queen suddenly withdrew from public life for several months, allegedly due to poor health. No one was allowed to see her. No one could enter her chambers. Her closest attendants were reassigned, and the palace fell eerily silent. A maid once wrote in her diary, before she disappeared, that night the cry of a child rose and then faded into the wind. No one dared to speak of it again. No one dared to ask. One wrong question could mean the fall of an axe. From that time, the court whispered that the Queen suffered from a woman's illness, a gentle phrase to conceal the unspeakable. And when she reappeared months later, slim, powdered, and smiling coldly before the crowd, the people cheered the Virgin Queen. But few knew that somewhere in England, on that very night, a child was carried away into darkness. A carriage without royal insignia rolled through a misty forest. Inside, a woman cradled an infant wrapped in a silk cloth embroidered with a crane, the emblem of the Dudley family. No one ever knew where that carriage stopped. Some said it went to Hatfield, others whispered of a dissolved monastery. Only one thing is certain: from that night on, the child vanished from history, until Arthur Dudley emerged nearly 30 years later. His story shook the Spanish court. The interrogators recorded his every word in trembling handwriting. They described him as a man of noble bearing, proud eyes, and an English accent, heavy yet confident. One officer wrote, "If he is a liar, then he is a liar born in a palace." From the shadows of the interrogation chamber, Arthur told his story. A childhood raised by a mysterious man, loyal to a powerful woman in the north. He said that as an adult, he learned he was the result of a forbidden love. Seeking answers, he journeyed to Spain, the homeland of his mother's old enemies, believing someone there still knew the truth. But just as suddenly as he appeared, Arthur vanished from the records. As he faded from the records, no death, no grave, no trace. Only yellowed pages remain, telling of a man haunted by the sorrow of a dynasty. Some say he was killed to bury the secret forever. Others believe he lived under another name, far from the eyes of history. Yet in the folk tales of southern England, they still whisper that on moonlit nights, a fair-haired man is seen standing silently before the gates of an old abbey, murmuring, "Mother, I kept your promise." And so the secret of Elizabeth I returns once more to silence. Arthur Dudley vanished, leaving behind only a faint shadow in the chronicles of history and a chain of unanswered questions. But to understand this mystery, we must turn back the clock to the years when the secret may have begun, when the love between Elizabeth and Robert Dudley still burned like a bright flame in the darkness of the throne. Robert Dudley entered Elizabeth's life like a lonely star shining brilliantly in the bleak sky of politics and intrigue. They had both known fear and humiliation, both stood at the edge of death's abyss. They understood each other without words because both knew what it felt like to be abandoned by the world. When Elizabeth was crowned queen, Robert stood beside her, his eyes filled with loyalty, devotion, and a kind of affection she had never seen in anyone else. During the early years of her reign, he was the closest person to her, granted the privilege of entering her private chambers at any hour, a freedom that made the entire court tremble with envy and suspicion. The Whitehall Palace became a labyrinth of rumors. At night, candles in the Queen's chambers burned until dawn. Some said Robert stayed late to discuss matters of state, but others whispered that they heard laughter, the clinking of silver goblets, the soft rhythm of footsteps on velvet, and then silence. For a queen, love was not only a luxury, it was a danger. Elizabeth knew that a single slip, a trace of emotion exposed, could bring down an entire crown. But the heart does not understand the logic of power. Robert still had a wife, Amy Robsart, a woman left behind in the countryside, living in loneliness and endless quiet. They said she wrote letters, begged her husband to return, but no answer ever came. Then, one autumn morning in 1560, servants found Amy lying lifeless at the foot of the stairs, her neck broken, her dress dust-stained. Her hair spilled across the cold tiles. There were no signs of struggle, no cry for help. The official report wrote simply, "Died by misfortune." But London did not believe it. In taverns and marketplaces, people whispered that Amy had not fallen, she had been pushed. The rumors spread faster than fire, surrounding the palace like a storm. Elizabeth locked herself away for days, saying nothing. Robert was shunned by the courtiers, their cold eyes following him everywhere. No one spoke aloud what everyone silently believed. After that, Elizabeth was never the same. She kept Robert close, allowed him into every meeting, granted him new titles, but something between them had broken. One night, a maid saw the Queen standing before a mirror, crown in hand, whispering to herself, "If I were Elizabeth Dudley, Would England still love me? No one answered. That question was meant only for the man in her heart, and he remained silent. From then on, Elizabeth began to wear armor made of image, the Virgin Queen. She let the world believe that her solitude was a sacrifice for England, that she had given her life to the realm. But in the unseen hours, when the palace lay bathed in candlelight, it was said she kept a small box by her bed, containing the final letter of Robert Dudley, the man she called "My Robin." In 1588, when Robert died, Elizabeth said nothing. She withdrew to her chamber and sat by the window overlooking the river. 3 days later, when her servants entered, they found a crumpled note inside the box. "To my queen, my friend, my everything." She kept that letter for the rest of her life, until her final breath. But Elizabeth's secret was more than a letter. There remained a gap in her life, those missing months in the winter of 1561, when the Queen vanished from public view. No meetings, no ceremonies, no visitors. Her closest attendants were reassigned, the court records erased, leaving only a few vague notes saying she suffered from a woman's illness and needed rest. A maid later claimed that one night she heard a soft cry from the Queen's private chamber, a cry small and fragile, like that of a newborn. Then silence. The next morning, the room was empty. From that moment, all traces of that night were buried, yet rumors spread. A carriage without royal insignia had left the palace under cover of darkness, heading toward Hatfield. Inside was a woman wrapped in a heavy cloak, holding something swaddled in crimson cloth. No one dared to ask, and no one dared to record it. In Elizabeth's court, some truths could only be whispered in the dark. And then, as if nothing had happened, the Queen reappeared months later, her face pale beneath white lead powder, her smile sharp as a blade, her eyes glowing with strange fire. She stood before her people, raised her hands like an untouchable symbol, and under the sun the crowd shouted, "Long live the Virgin Queen!" No one knew that on that very night, in the eastern crypt beneath Hatfield, a child was carried out of the carriage and vanished from history. 30 years later, he would return, bearing the name Arthur Dudley, and a confession that would shake all of Europe. 30 years passed like a faded dream, blurred by the dust of time. When people believed that every secret had long been buried with the aging Queen across the sea, a name began to whisper once more through the shadows: Arthur Dudley. In 1587, on the western coast of Spain, a damaged ship drifted ashore. Among the survivors was a tall, slender man who spoke English, his eyes sharp and haunted, as if he had spent years being hunted. When the officers asked his name, he replied with a calm, almost chilling composure, "I am Arthur Dudley, son of Queen Elizabeth of England and the Earl of Leicester." The room fell silent. The Spanish soldiers stared at one another, thinking he was joking, but he did not smile. He held their gaze, his voice steady, his eyes burning with a strange, regal pride. So familiar it made them uneasy. Arthur was immediately taken to Madrid, to the Escorial Palace for interrogation. Spain was then at war with England, and any information about Elizabeth was considered treasure. But what shocked them most was not Arthur's claim, but how he told his story. Without fear, without seeking reward, as if he were merely recounting his destiny. He said that as a child, he was raised in a secluded estate in eastern England under the care of a nobleman who lived in hiding. This man often received letters sealed with the royal crest. Each time one arrived, he would lock himself away for hours. Arthur recalled that by the age of 8, he had been taught to speak, walk, and dine like an aristocrat, though no one ever told him who his parents were. Only once, on a moonlit night, the man, slightly drunk, had whispered, "You may not bear your father's name, but the blood in your veins is the blood of a queen." Arthur paused when recounting this, then continued. As he grew older, he was told the truth, that he was the forbidden child of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. He described every detail of the Queen's private world, how she pinned pearls into her hair, how she sipped honey mixed with ginger before sleep, the small scar on her left shoulder, and the scent she wore, a blend of amber and lavender. None of these things appeared in any chronicle. Only someone who had lived inside the palace could have known them. The Spanish officers began to grow afraid. They reported to the king, writing, "This man speaks as though he were raised within the shadow of a throne." A diplomat added privately, "If he lies, then he is a liar born to be a prince." During his confinement, Arthur never panicked. He ate little, often stood by the barred window watching the sunset in the west toward England. One guard said that every night he whispered a single name, Robin, like a prayer. When asked why he came to Spain, Arthur said he fled England after his true identity was discovered. Someone had been following him. Someone had tried to silence him forever. He believed only the Spanish, Elizabeth's enemies, had the courage to preserve the truth. The interrogations lasted for weeks. The Spaniards tried to trap him with strange questions, details only those from the royal household could know, and each time Arthur answered correctly. He described the arrangement of the throne room, the color of the carpet in the Queen's chamber, even the exact spot of a tiny crack on her bedroom wall, a detail confirmed later by spies. And then, one day, Arthur stopped speaking. He refused food. He sat silently in the corner, eyes distant. That night, according to the guard's notes, he smiled faintly, placed a hand over his heart, and murmured, "They've found me, but at least my mother will know I lived." By morning, Arthur was gone. There were no signs of escape, no body, no blood, no sound. The door was still locked. Only one thing remained on the table, a small piece of faded red cloth embroidered with the image of a crane, the emblem of the Dudley family. The Spanish court fell silent. The entire record of the case was sealed in secret archives. The name Arthur Dudley was erased from all diplomatic correspondence. For centuries afterward, no one spoke of him again, until the 18th century, when historians unearthed a bundle of yellowed pages. On one of them, a trembling line still read, "He spoke like a prince and carried pain like a secret crown." The storyteller's voice lowers, almost to a whisper. Perhaps it was only a legend. Perhaps Arthur never existed. But if you ever wander into Westminster Abbey on a windy night, when the candles are dying and the bells echo through the stone vaults, some say you can still hear the faint sound of footsteps in the dark. The footsteps of a son searching for his mother between the two tombs of two queens. England entered the final years of the 16th century bathed in the glow of triumph. The Spanish Armada had been defeated. The seas sang the Queen's name, and the people hailed that small, fierce woman as the symbol of a golden age. But within the cold walls of Richmond Palace, in rooms heavy with the scent of incense and the ticking of clocks, Elizabeth was slowly fading. She had conquered everything, wars, enemies, conspiracies, even the age itself, except for one thing, herself. Each morning, when her servants opened the curtains to welcome the sunlight, she would turn away. She feared mirrors, feared seeing the stranger who had taken her place, skin cracked beneath layers of white lead powder, heavy wigs that strained her neck, red-rimmed eyes dulled by exhaustion. The years of rule had worn her down, but what frightened the Queen most was not death. It was the ghost of everything left unsaid. Her closest ladies-in-waiting said that in those long nights, Elizabeth never slept. She would sit on her carved Tudor rose chair, thin hands folded on her lap, staring at a dying candle as if waiting for someone to return. Sometimes her lips moved softly, calling one name, Robin. And in moments of half-dream, another name slipped out, trembling, barely audible, Arthur. And every time she would startle, her gaze hardening, her voice turning sharp. No one is to speak of that. Servants whispered that in her final years, the queen often wandered the palace halls, long after everyone had gone to bed. The rustle of her silk gown echoed through the corridors, like wind in an empty cathedral. She would stop before a large portrait of herself in youth, in a white gown, fiery red hair, bright, fearless eyes. And beside her, Robert Dudley, his expression warm and tender. One night, they found the curtain torn down, Robert's painted face scratched beyond recognition. The candle below burned to nothing. No one knew what had happened, only that the next morning Elizabeth ordered, "Never hang that portrait again." Her body began to fail her, the cosmetics thick with metal dust, the skin dyes filled with mercury and lead, all turned the queen's face into a mask. It was said she would never allow anyone to see her unpainted. Even when she fell ill, she demanded powder, rouge, and wigs, as if the mask itself were the last armor holding her upright before the world. But when the wind blew through her chamber windows, carrying the distant toll of St. Paul's Cathedral, her fear returned. There was no one left to trust. Her loyalists were dead, her friends gone. Only memories remained. And among those memories, Robert Dudley always returned. And with him, another presence, a child she had never acknowledged, yet never forgotten. Sometimes, in restless sleep, Elizabeth would wake suddenly, her heart pounding, trembling as she reached for a small wooden box beside her bed. Inside was Robert's final letter, the only man who had ever touched her heart. "To my queen, my friend, my everything." The ink had faded, the paper browned with age, but she read it over and over, as though it were an incantation keeping the past alive. Some nights, she held the letter to her chest and whispered, "Robin, if I had been born a simple woman, would everything have been different?" To the world outside, she remained the invincible monarch, a legend of strength and will. But within, she was only an aging soul trapped inside the shell of power, a woman who had never been a mother, yet carried forever the ache of losing a child. Her most faithful servant, Lady Carey, recalled that in March 1603, the Queen grew strangely silent. She refused food, refused sleep, sitting by the window overlooking the river. When Carey begged her to rest, Elizabeth replied softly, "To lie down is to never rise again." Then she smiled, a fragile smile like a dying flame, and whispered, "I have lived as a queen. Now I only wish to die as a woman." That night, rain fell against the old rooftops like the ticking of time. A dim light flickered over the queen's face as she told Carey to kneel and take her hand. Her voice was faint. "Leave. Carey, if they ask, tell them I was never wrong. But if there is a child out there, pray that he may rest in peace." Carey bowed her head, tears falling onto the Queen's hand, and in that moment she saw a fleeting smile on Elizabeth's lips, not the smile of a ruler, but of a mother finally releasing a sorrow she had carried her entire life. The next morning the church bells tolled 70 times, one for each year of her life. Outside the palace, the streets were lined with mourning crowds, black veils fluttering in the wind. The funeral was grand and somber. The coffin was draped in white velvet, red roses scattered along the path, incense mingling with the mist. As the procession crossed London Bridge, the River Thames lay still, and above it, a single white crane circled once before disappearing into the clouds. No one seemed to remember that the crane was the emblem of the Dudley family, the bloodline history tried to erase. Elizabeth's body was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, beside her half-sister, Mary Tudor, the woman who once called her the child of sin. Two women who had once been rivals now lay together in one tomb. The Latin inscription above their grave reads, "Partners in throne and grave, sisters in hope." But those who have stood beneath that vaulted ceiling, listening to the wind sigh through the ancient stone, say that more than hope sleeps there. a secret still lingers, one that has never been spoken aloud. Over a century later, when the archives of Madrid were reopened, a forgotten dossier was found, the file on Arthur Dudley. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but one final line from the Spanish examiner remained. If he was not the Queen's son, then he was the greatest actor born of sorrow. No one can say for certain whether Arthur Dudley truly existed, nor can anyone dismiss it entirely. Some truths do not live in records. They live in the spaces between them, in what cannot be explained. And sometimes, on foggy nights over Westminster, when the candlelight flickers upon the stone-carved Elizabeth Regina, people say they can still hear a whisper soft as wind, faint as breath, the voice of a mother calling to her child history forgot. The wind moves gently through the cracks of the old stone, mingling with the echo of bells beneath the high dome. In the dim light, one might almost see her, a woman in a white cloak, faded red hair, deep, knowing eyes, walking slowly between two worlds, between power and loneliness. She stops before a small shadow, raises her hand as if to touch, and then the light goes out. Only the wind remains, and a quiet lullaby, like an ancient dream that never truly ended. Some secrets never die. They simply learn how to whisper. In the years following Elizabeth's death, England seemed at peace. James VI of Scotland ascended the throne, becoming James I of England, uniting two kingdoms and closing the chapter of the Tudors to usher in the Stuarts. People said the age of queens was over, along with its doubts, rumors, and forbidden loves. But the truth is, nothing ever truly ends. It merely transforms, becoming quieter, more secret, like an old breath that refuses to fade into the fog. Inside Westminster Abbey, where Elizabeth rests, it is said that candles burn out faster near her tomb. The priests call it drafts of air, but the tomb keepers know better. Sometimes, at midnight, when only one candle remains lit in the vast cathedral, there comes a faint rustle, like silk brushing across stone. Then a fragrance, lavender mingled with amber, drifts through the air, so light, so fleeting, that everyone who smells it. Shh. In the 17th century, documents from Spain were transferred to London. Historians began to notice the files concerning a man named Arthur Dudley, the strange traveler from England who claimed to be the Queen's son. The records were translated, copied, and then quietly sealed away again, as though someone feared that such a truth could shake a monument. Still, a few discreet scholars kept reading, taking notes, comparing every detail, and the deeper they went, the more unease crept in. Arthur did not only know the palace, he knew things frighteningly intimate. He described how the Queen wore a silver ring engraved with ER as a charm, how she kept in her desk drawer a small red cloth embroidered with a crane, the emblem of Robert Dudley. He told of a golden dagger with a pearl handle that she used each morning to cut roses. These details were later confirmed in royal inventory archives. There was no way to explain it. Some said that if Arthur were a fraud, he was one destined to be born at the exact moment when truth needed a face. His words provoked just enough doubt, but never enough proof. A fracture appeared in history, not a shattering, just a hairline crack in the old plaster of the past, where candlelight could slip through, then vanish again. Centuries later, when scholars from Oxford and Madrid reconstructed the Spanish archives, they discovered that around the same time Arthur was being interrogated, a secret message had been sent from London. The letter bore no signature, only a single line: "Destroy the Englishman before he speaks again." The folded paper bore a red wax seal, shaped like a Tudor rose. Modern historians say it was likely coincidence, but storytellers like me never believe in coincidence. In history, there are only invisible hands, hands that erase, but never completely wipe away the traces of emotion. Time passed. The legend of the Virgin Queen became engraved into the soul of England, a source of pride, Statues were raised, poems written, plays performed. Elizabeth became the emblem of brilliance and strength. No one mentioned the rumors. No one dared ask whether she had truly loved, or borne a child, or hidden a forbidden life. Until one autumn day in 1760, when workers reopened an old chamber in Hatfield Palace for restoration. Inside a drawer of an ancient oak desk, they found a small relic, a faded piece of red cloth embroidered with a crane. Nearby lay a decayed wooden box containing several burned scraps of paper. Only one line remained legible. "Let no one ever know of him. England must never remember." Scholars debated for years whether it was truly Elizabeth's handwriting. The ink and paper matched her era, the pen strokes resembled hers, but no one dared declare it genuine. Sometimes history accepts only what flatters power, not what belongs to the heart. Perhaps that silence itself is the answer, a silence deep and unbroken through centuries, like the held breath of a woman who once ruled the world but feared being found. One night in the late 18th century, the keeper of Westminster Abbey claimed that while cleaning the crypt he saw a shadow flicker by candlelight, a woman in a long cloak, wearing a silver crown, her face half lit, half hidden. She moved slowly toward Elizabeth's tomb, laid a dried rose upon the stone, and disappeared. When they checked the next morning, a withered rose petal indeed lay across the carved words, Elizabeth Regina. Some called it an illusion, but the keeper swore that in that moment the air smelled of lavender and amber, the Queen's own perfume. Years later, biographers tried to restore Elizabeth's humanity, not as a myth, not as a saint, but as a woman who once loved, feared, and sacrificed the softest part of herself to hold the crown. They wrote that perhaps she never bore a child, or perhaps she did and that child was never allowed to live, because England needed a symbol, not a mother. In the irony of history, it was that sanctified virginity that became the veil hiding her deepest sorrow. She had given up her humanity to become an image, and that image would never rest. Tonight, if you ever walk into Westminster Abbey when the wind blows from the Thames, you may see the candles trembling under the vaulted ceiling, hear the stones breathe, and the wind whisper among the tombs of kings. And if you listen carefully, with patience and silence, you might catch a faint melody, an ancient lullaby in Old English words. "Sleep, my child, for silence keeps you safe." They say it is Elizabeth's voice, the woman who was never called mother, yet whose heart still searches for the child that history stole. Whether she sings to someone lost or to herself, no one knows. In the dim light, the statues of kings, warriors, and poets stand motionless. Only the candle before Elizabeth's tomb flickers, as if bowing its flame. And when you step back into the damp London night, you might feel something walking beside you. Not fear, but a gentle sadness, as though someone still longs to finish telling a story left untold. Perhaps somewhere between two worlds, Elizabeth is smiling. No longer a queen, no longer an icon, just a woman standing in the mist, whispering, "My son, you are free now." And once again, the wind sighs, carrying with it the scent of lavender, amber, and the loneliness of a love that once shook an empire. Because in the end, there are secrets that never die. They only learn how to whisper. In the centuries that followed, the English continued to venerate Elizabeth as an untarnished symbol. They called her the Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the Mother of the Nation. Statues rose in her likeness, theaters bore her name, poets and playwrights turned her image into an emblem of wisdom, courage, and eternal purity. No one spoke of Robert Dudley anymore. No one dared mention Arthur. What was once the breath of a living woman was replaced by marble, makeup, and myth. Yet among those who study history deeply, a faint crack remains between truth and the story that power told posterity. In the 19th century, as archaeology and historical collection flourished, A team of scholars from Cambridge University was granted permission to examine the royal tombs. Beneath layers of dust, they uncovered several old funeral records of Elizabeth. Among the relics lay a small, rusted jewelry box containing a roll of paper. Written in a fine, trembling hand were the words, "Do not open the red silk pouch." When they did, they found only a few faded threads, their color long gone, and a faint fragrance that drifted into the air before vanishing. No one spoke. One man whispered, "Lavender." And then there was silence. From that moment, the legend of the red silk pouch haunted historians. Some believed it was the last keepsake Elizabeth had of Robert Dudley. Others thought it was the only remnant of the child history had hidden. But no one dared to publish it. Under Queen Victoria, Elizabeth had become the mirror of female virtue and royal dignity, and even a rumor could fracture the image upon which a nation's pride was built. So the secret slept for more centuries, buried beneath layers of interpretation, prayer, and dust. Yet those who lived near Westminster Abbey said that when night fell, something stirred. Footsteps echoed on stone floors, the faint clink of metal like old bracelets, and sometimes a soft sigh rising from beneath the earth. One winter night in 1899, a watchman named Thomas Holcroft reported seeing a dim light flickering in the southern crypt. When he went down to investigate, a strange scent met him. Not wax, not smoke, but lavender mixed with honey. In that flickering glow, he saw a woman in a white gown standing motionless before the stone-carved Elizabeth Regina. Her face was blurred by shadow, but her hair gleamed like copper, and her hand rested lightly upon the cold slab. Thomas called out softly, but the figure only tilted her head, as if listening to someone speak. Then the candle went out. He fainted. When found at dawn, he was unharmed, except that in his hand, he still clutched a wilted rose. He never spoke of it again, but 10 years later he left behind a thin notebook. In it, a single line read, "I have seen her. She is not at rest. She waits for someone still." By the 20th century, historians began to look upon Elizabeth's reign with new eyes. She was no longer just the triumphant monarch. They searched her diaries, her letters, and diplomatic exchanges between England and Spain. Some of William Cecil's original letters contained erased passages, but modern restoration techniques revealed faint words. Her retreat in the winter of '61 must be kept secret. No explanation followed. The discovery shook the academic world. Some laughed it off. Others trembled, and it seemed that whenever researchers dug a little deeper, something strange occurred. An Oxford scholar once claimed that while examining a copy of one of Elizabeth's letters to Robert, she noticed beneath the Queen's signature ER a faint smudge resembling a child's handprint in pale ink. But when she returned to view the original, the mark had vanished. The tale became so unsettling that scientists coined a term for it: the Elizabeth effect, the phenomenon where every piece of evidence tied to her secret seemed to erase itself, as though history itself wished to preserve her silence. And then, in the modern age, archaeology and genetic research opened a new chapter. In 2023, a joint British-Spanish team analyzed DNA samples from Elizabeth's preserved letters and personal items, comparing them with genetic data from noble remains of her time. Their report noted an anomaly, a recurring genetic pattern matching several unidentified samples, possibly connected to the Dudley bloodline. The evidence was inconclusive, yet enough to awaken a question buried for centuries. Newspapers revived the rumor, scholars argued, the public dreamed. Could it be that somewhere within the veins of modern Europe still flows a trace of the Virgin Queen's blood? Amid the uproar, an aging historian wrote in his private journal, "We have spent centuries worshipping her crown, but perhaps we should have listened to her silence. For perhaps that silence was not denial, but a prayer, a way to protect someone, a way to keep love forbidden, fragile, but pure, untouched by history's cruelty. And so, after hundreds of years, the story returns to where it began, 2 tombs lying still beneath the vaulted dome of Westminster, where candles never fully burn out, and wind breathes softly through the stones like the sigh of time itself. Tonight, if you wander into that cathedral, tread gently, for someone may still be there. A mother who lost her child, a woman who was never allowed to be one, a restless soul. And when the wind carries the scent of lavender and amber, do not fear. Listen, for perhaps within the mingling of wind and bells you will hear a whisper, soft, fragile, almost human. Some secrets don't die, they just learn to whisper. And if at that moment you see the candle by her tomb flicker, do not think it only the wind. Perhaps someone is smiling at you, the woman who once held an empire in her hands, yet forever lost her heart. Perhaps that is the price of glory, and perhaps, in the endless dark, Elizabeth no longer seeks crowns or victory. She simply walks, slowly, through the dust-laden halls of Westminster, searching for a voice, a child, a name, a breath once buried by time. Because though the world may deny it, though legend may gild her in gold, beneath every title and symbol, Elizabeth remains what she always was, a mother forced to forget her child, though her soul never could. And when the last candles fade, their light trembling over the stone-carved Elizabeth Regina, the wind in the abbey rises once more, singing her eternal lullaby. Sleep, my child, for your rest is my peace. And so, in the heart of England, the Queen's dream goes on, quiet, tender, and never-ending. Oprah's light. In modern times, as London blazes with neon light and endless streams of cars, Westminster Abbey still stands, silent and solemn, like an old soul refusing to fade into memory. Though the crowds rush past it every day, its gray stone walls still hold the chill of the 16th century. In the heart of a city that never stops changing, this place remains where time stands still. And beneath the cold marble floor, Elizabeth's story has never truly ended. By day, tourists crowd the aisles, snapping photos and treading softly across the engraved slabs of kings and queens. They read faded inscriptions, listen to guides speak of victories, power, and the glory of a vanished age. But when night falls, when the great doors close and the last light retreats from the stained glass, the abbey becomes what it once was, a world of wind, stone, and memory. The current keeper is Eleanor Price, who has worked at Westminster for over 30 years. She knows every stair, every crack in the walls. Yet even she, calm and sensible as she is, admits there's something unsettled around Elizabeth's tomb. Sometimes, just after midnight, when the river wind rises, all the candles in the crypt go out at once, and then one flame rekindles itself above the slab marked Elizabeth Regina. Eleanor speaks softly when she tells it, as though afraid to wake someone. I think, she says, she's still awake. At first, she dismissed these feelings as imagination, but one night, while writing in her duty log, she heard a whisper close by. A low, ancient woman's voice speaking in Old English. "They will never know, my son." She turned, but there was only emptiness and that faint, unmistakable scent. Lavender and amber, the same fragrance described in the old accounts. The story spread among scholars and journalists. Film crews and paranormal researchers came to record at night. In one clip from 2009, when the camera swept past the crypt, a thin beam of light flickered exactly across Elizabeth's tomb before vanishing. The audio captured what sounded like fabric brushing stone, and a sigh. Many called it an optical illusion. Yet those who watched the footage never forgot the chill that crept down their spine. A young historian named Marcus Hall began his own investigation. He didn't believe in ghosts, only in unanswered history. For 3 years, he studied every surviving record of Elizabeth's reign, traveling even to Madrid, where the files on Arthur Dudley had once been kept. In a 17th-century box untouched for centuries, he found a copy of a handwritten report by the Spanish interrogator. The final line made him sit in silence. He prayed every night, not to be remembered, but to be forgiven. Marcus began to sense the story was no longer just history. It was something alive, still unfolding. He returned to England and met Eleanor Price. Together they descended into the crypt. She told him that every year on November 17th, the anniversary of Elizabeth's coronation, a single white rose always appears on the floor before the tomb. No one knows who places it, and no camera has ever captured the act. The rose is always fresh, no matter how cold the night, and the scent is always lavender and amber. Marcus asked to stay through that night. He brought a flashlight, a recorder, a notebook. When the clock struck 12, he heard a faint sound, footsteps in the corridor. A cold wind swept through, making his candle quiver. In that wavering light, the stone slab seemed to tremble, as if something below was breathing. Then came a voice, distant and hollow, rising from beneath. "Art there?" Marcus could not speak. He sat, trembling, listening. The voice continued, soft and sorrowful, like water over stone. "You were my crown, the only one I could not wear." The candle died. Darkness swallowed the crypt. When he turned on his flashlight, all was still, except for one small, circular mark on the stone, like a tear fallen on cold marble. The next morning, Marcus left Westminster, carrying Arthur's transcripts and the certainty that history had not yet ended. He later published a book titled The Queen's Whisper. He neither confirmed nor denied anything. He simply told what he had seen and heard, ending with the words, "Maybe truth is not what is written, but what refuses to be silenced." The book became a sensation. Some called it fiction. Others believed Marcus had touched the soul of history itself. Thousands began visiting Westminster, not only to see the crown and throne, but to feel that shiver before Elizabeth's tomb. Visitors lit small candles, placed white roses, and sometimes a few tinged with red, for blood or for guilt. No one knew. On rainy nights, Eleanor Price would look through the crypt door and see the candles flickering in the wind. She would smile and say, "Perhaps, at last, she isn't lonely anymore." As for Marcus, he vanished a few years after the book's release. It was said he left England for Spain to find the last missing piece of the story. In his empty London apartment, police found a single folded note on his desk. "You grew up knowing more people. I am going to meet the boy who never grew old." He was never found, but the following spring, a parcel arrived at Westminster Abbey. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook, unsigned, containing 2 final lines. "Some secrets wait centuries to be heard. Some just need a quiet heart to listen." Eleanor opened it. The scent of lavender rose faintly from the pages. Inside lay a single dried rose. She placed it gently upon Elizabeth's tomb and whispered, "Now, my lady, you may rest." From that night onward, the candles around the stone never went out again. The wind still moved through Westminster, but softly now, like a lullaby. People said the long song had finally ended. If you ever visit the Abbey at dusk, when the sunlight filters through the stained glass and spills over the stone marked Elizabeth Regina, you'll see the light turn a warm, golden hue, as if, after all these centuries, the Queen's soul has at last found what power never gave her, peace. For in a life built of crowns and illusions, one thing alone was real, a love buried deep and a voice that still drifts upon the wind. Believe now, my child, for the crown is finally light. And so the story closes, soft as the breath of a candle, dissolving into the London night. Yet perhaps in some dream, if you listen closely, that voice still whispers. Not to recount history, but to remind us that sometimes love is the only thing stronger than time. When people thought the story had finally ended, Westminster Abbey continued to breathe its old, patient breaths. Time moved on, the world outside changed every day, yet here, among the stone pillars, flickering candles, and echoing bells, the heartbeat of the 16th century endured. That winter, London was shrouded in the thickest fog it had seen in decades. By evening, even Big Ben vanished from sight across the river. In that damp, cold air, a small documentary crew was granted permission to film overnight inside Westminster Abbey. They were creating a series titled The Hidden Voices of History, Tales Forgotten in the Shadow of Power. Elizabeth, naturally, was the soul of the first episode. The presenter, Lydia Gray, had a low, smoky voice, like a whisper from another century. On the first night of filming, Lydia stood before Elizabeth's tomb, bathed in the gold of candlelight. She began softly. They called her the Virgin Queen, but everything we know about her was written by others. Her voice drifted like smoke, and in that moment, amid lenses and light, a chill wind swept through, sharp cold, carrying the faint scent of lavender. When they reviewed the audio later, there were low-frequency murmurs, like someone whispering beneath the sound. The sound technician said it was only the ancient church's echo, but Lydia insisted she heard a single word: Arthur. They stopped filming that night. One of the crew, the lighting operator, claimed he saw a dim glow moving across the tomb. Not a reflection, but as if someone were walking slowly with a torch. The light paused over the words, Elizabeth Regina, then disappeared. The next day, Lydia visited Eleanor Price, the elderly keeper. Eleanor studied her for a long time before saying, "She doesn't want to be filmed, not out of shame, but because what she hides isn't meant for the camera." Still, Lydia couldn't stop. The deeper she went, the more the story consumed her. She read letters, reports, and traveled to Hatfield, Woodstock, Whitehall, all the places Elizabeth had once called home. At Hatfield, in the garden where rumors said a child was taken away one night, Lydia heard footsteps behind her in the mist. When she turned, only bare trees stood. That night, she recorded in her journal, "There's something here, not fear, presence, as if the past never left. I feel that if I speak the child's name aloud, the wind will answer." 3 nights later, in her small London hotel room, Lydia reviewed the footage. In the final frame, as the camera drifted across the tomb, the candlelight flickered, and for just a few seconds, the faint outline of a red-haired woman stood behind it. The scene spread quietly among filmmakers, then was banned from broadcast. But Lydia kept a copy, and it drove her to begin another journey, not as a filmmaker, but as a seeker of truth. She wrote to scholars in Madrid, asking about the Arthur Dudley files. A week later, she received a brief reply. Only 3 lines. "Some files cannot be shared. The boy's name still echoes here." Lydia understood. What was hidden wasn't in the tomb, but in the memory of nations that had feared the truth. The following April, she returned to Westminster alone. No cameras, no crew, only a notebook. As she entered the crypt, cold air surged out like the breath of another century. She knelt before the tomb, laid her hand on the stone and whispered, "If you truly loved and lost, I will tell your story in truth, not myth." There was no reply, only candlelight quivering, then fading to dark. By morning, they found Lydia lying beside the tomb, unhurt, peaceful, asleep. In her hand was an old ash-stained paper with a scent of smoke, written in Old English. "For the sake of England, I kept him hidden. "Forgive me, Robin." No one knew where it came from or how it appeared. The crypt was always locked. The paper seemed centuries old. Conservators sent it for analysis, but it vanished from the archives soon after. The event was never made public, only mentioned briefly in the Abbey's internal bulletin. But Eleanor Price, who witnessed it, later said she saw something she would never forget. When they carried Lydia out, the morning light fell upon Elizabeth's tomb, and on the cold stone, 2 small drops glimmered like tears. Westminster closed the crypt for maintenance for several months. Eleanor retired soon after. Before leaving, she wrote a short letter to the Museum of London. "Never try to break the silence. It is not a curse. It is a prayer." In the years that followed, the story of Elizabeth and her secret child returned to popular culture. Hundreds of articles, books, and shows were produced, each offering a different ending. Some said Arthur was a spy. Others swore he was her son. Some claimed he never existed at all, merely a reflection of a queen's loneliness. Yet one truth could not be denied, even after all these centuries. When people speak of Elizabeth I, there is always a heaviness in the air, as if beneath all the triumph and glory, something remains unfinished. Modern historians now recognize that the Virgin Queen was a political construct, a mask to protect the throne, and a chain that bound the woman behind it. She became legend, but at the price of her humanity. Perhaps that is why, even now, her spirit cannot rest. Her true story was not victory, but loss. A young poet once stood before her tomb and wrote in his notebook, "They called her the light of England, but light cannot live without its shadow." Perhaps that shadow is where her child, real or imagined, still lingers, quietly watching as the world worships the symbol and forgets the heart. She closed the door. There was nowhere else to go, and she turned to the window, her gaze focused. Today, when someone lights a candle before Elizabeth's tomb, the glow reflects upon the vaulted ceiling, forming streaks of light like wings in flight. Some say if you look closely, one of those shapes resembles a crane, the ancient emblem of the Dudley line. A few pilgrims claim to hear the wind hum a lullaby, not in modern English, but in an older, forgotten tongue. Sleep, my child, your story lives in silence. Then the candles go out, leaving only the drifting scent of lavender. Perhaps the tale will go on for centuries more, scholars still debating, dreamers still believing. But amid it all, one truth remains. Humanity is forever haunted by what it cannot grasp. And, in all of history, nothing captivates us more than a secret wrapped in love. Elizabeth lived, ruled, and conquered empires, yet in the end it was love that made her immortal, not because it was returned, but because it was never allowed to end. And if one night you lie awake, listening to rain against the window, imagining the crackle of candles or the whisper of silk on stone, close your eyes. You might hear, carried by the wind across the sea, a voice as soft as breath. Some secrets don't die, my dear. They just wait for you to dream. Then you will understand why the story of Queen Elizabeth I has never truly ended. For stories born of love, even when buried in stone, blood, or forgotten pages, always find their way back. Through wind, through time, through hearts willing to listen. That night, the wind from the Thames drifted in, brushing the cold marble. Candlelight flickered, casting on the wall the silhouette of a red-haired woman beside a young man. They did not speak, only looked at one another in silence. Then the light went out. Only the scent of lavender remained, and the endless lullaby of the past. As the last candles in Westminster Abbey fade into the dark, the midnight bells begin to toll. Slow, deep, like the heartbeat of an age still pulsing somewhere in the shadows. We have walked through the cold corridors of power, listened to the wind carrying whispers from 4 centuries past, and seeing that behind the glittering crown lies a heart once broken. Elizabeth I, the woman forbidden to love, forbidden to be weak, forbidden to bear a child, left behind a vast legacy for the world, but carried her greatest secret down into the earth. Was there truly an Arthur Dudley, a child hidden in the night of history? Or was he only the ghost of regret, born from dreams she never dared to live? No one can say for certain. Some truths choose not to exist through evidence, but through presence, through a breath of wind, a lingering scent, and silence itself. Perhaps that silence was her gentlest confession. Elizabeth ruled with her mind, but in the end she may have departed with the heart of a mother, a heart never acknowledged, yet still capable of love, of sorrow, of waiting. If you ever visit Westminster at dusk, when the last light falls upon the stone engraved Elizabeth Regina, pause for a moment. Listen. Perhaps in the fragile space between two breaths of wind you'll hear that old whisper again, not of a queen, but of a woman calling out to a child history forgot. And maybe there, in that tender pause between power and love, we realize that secrets are not meant to be judged, but to be understood. Because, as someone once said, some secrets don't die, they just learn to whisper. Thank you for listening to tonight's story. And if you're still awake, leave me a comment, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. May your night be peaceful. And if in your dreams you hear the wind softly call the name Arthur, don't be afraid. Perhaps history is simply looking for someone willing to listen once more. Good night.